Hello, everyone, and welcome to our last session in the Advocacy Academy series. In previous sessions, we talked about campaigning and organizing, conflict management strategies, and effective storytelling. So now in our final session, we're going to put it all together by talking about legislative advocacy. Our goal with this series was to provide some essential information and help folks build their advocacy skills. And even though we're talking about advocacy at the state legislature today, specifically, the series as a whole is meant to apply to a wide range of advocacy activities and initiatives at all levels. The upcoming legislative session is a great opportunity for you to jump right in with and use the things that you've learned with us throughout this series. If you've been with us for previous sessions, thank you so much for sticking around. I hope this series has helped you feel more prepared to go out and fight for the issues that you are passionate about. If this is your first session with us, welcome. The previous sessions are available on our YouTube channel. I want to make a few notes about accessibility for this session. You should have captions at the bottom of your screen in white, and then I'll also be providing brief visual descriptions throughout the presentation for essential information on different slides. This first one is a slide with a light blue background with the words Advocacy Academy and the ACLU of South Dakota logo in white. And the title of our presentation in dark blue, which is Fundamentals of Legislative Advocacy. And there's also a picture of me. I'm your instructor. My name is Jet Janellis. I'm the advocacy manager at the ACLU of South Dakota. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns. And I'm a white person in a black and white checkered shirt. I have short brown hair and dark rimmed glasses. Okay, so let's get started. Hopefully you have heard about us before. We're the ACLU of South Dakota. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works in the courts, in the state legislature, and other governmental bodies, and in communities to defend and advance the civil rights and civil liberties guaranteed to everyone in South Dakota by the state and federal constitutions. We work on a lot of different issues, a very wide range. We work on abortion access and reproductive rights, criminal justice reform, LGBTQ and two-spirit rights, Indigenous justice, disability rights, free speech, privacy and technology, gender justice, women's rights, voting rights, and more. In terms of our staff, we are community organizers, we're attorneys, we're policy nerds, lobbyists, communication experts, and advocates, and overall just people who care about South Dakota and the people who live here. In terms of our agenda for tonight, we're going to start off with a land acknowledgement, and then we're going to talk in depth about the South Dakota legislative process. It's kind of a School of Rock portion. And we're also going to take a couple of practical examples from the 2021 session to illustrate how bills move through the legislative process generally and how they can get kind of wacky too. After that, we're going to talk about legislative advocacy tips and then some resources to stay informed and get involved. And after that, we're going to wrap up the series. So let's start with a land acknowledgement. Although we're in a virtual space right now, we want to start off with a land acknowledgement. The ACLU of South Dakota offices are located on the ancestral territory of the Ocheti-Shikoe Seven Sacred Council Fires. That's an alliance that consisted of the Santee, Yankton, and Teton Lakota. They're commonly known as the Sioux by non-native people, and the seven tribes now occupy 9 different reservations in South Dakota. The 9 reservations are the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, the Crow Creek Sioux Tribe, Flanger Santee Sioux Tribe, Lower Brule Sioux Tribe, Oglala Sioux Tribe, Rosebud Sioux Tribe, Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate, Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, and the Yankton Sioux Tribe. The ACLU of South Dakota honors and respects the diverse Indigenous people connected to this territory on which we gather. So I'd like to, offer a quote up. It said that Franklin Delano Roosevelt used to tell his supporters that it was their job to make him do the right thing. And he was right. It is our job to help and make elected officials do the right thing. So this is a great quote with a great point speaking to the importance of legislative advocacy and the necessity of the public putting pressure on the people in power to do what is right and stand up for all South Dakotans. The focus of this training is one of the most powerful and important decision-making bodies in our government. That's the state legislature. And while we'll be talking about the state legislature almost exclusively today, a lot of what we're going to cover can be applied to any elected officials or powerful people you want to influence. So that could be your city council, your county commission, your school board, and more. Throughout this presentation, I want you to think about people in power, what you want them to do, and how your actions can persuade them to do that thing. Legislative advocacy is about using one of the most important tools that you have, and that is your voice. Your voice and your actions are your power. And knowing how to use that power to move state legislators to support the issues that you care about and oppose the measures that are discriminatory and harmful is critical and absolutely necessary to creating the world that you actually want to live in, one that is more just and equitable and is a place where people in from all different types of communities in South Dakota can thrive. Your advocacy and your activism will be far more effective if you understand how the legislature works, though, because once you do understand that, you'll be able to make a lot of strategic decisions about how to act, who to target with your actions, and when to take those actions. And when I say actions, I'm thinking of anything from an email to your legislator to a trip to pier or a march or anything in between. So on this slide, we have a map of South Dakota in different shades of blue, and that's because the state legislature is made up of people from all over the state. Our legislature is bicameral, meaning it has two houses of equal power. And those are the South Dakota Senate and the South Dakota House of Representatives. Each district has one senator and 2 representatives, and we have 35 districts overall. So that means that we have 105 legislators, and it means that there are 3 people who are representing you directly in the South Dakota legislature. There are 2 exceptions to that, which are District 26 and District 28, which are broken into A-B districts. Meaning that there is 1 representative in charge of representing A and 1 in charge of representing B. Right now, there are only 2 political parties represented in here. That's Republicans and Democrats. And of 105 total legislators, 94 are Republicans and 11 are Democrats. So in the House, there are overall 70 members. 62 of them are Republicans and 8 of them are Democrats. And in the Senate, that's 35 members. And there are 32 Republicans and 3 Democrats. On this side, we have a graphic of 3 circles connected by a line. The leftmost has a piece of paper in it, and it's labeled drafting and introducing bills. That's connected to the middle circle, which has people in it, one of whom is at a podium above the others. And it is labeled debating the merits of bills. And that is connected to the rightmost circle with a ballot box in it, which is labeled voting to pass or kill bills. Those are the 3 major things that legislators are responsible for. Each district elects legislators that are tasked with representing them. Though legislators do many things, their primary duty is to make the laws that govern our state and impact the lives of all South Dakotans. So let's talk about those 3 main components a little more in depth. Drafting and introducing bills is kind of the meat of how laws are made. Legislators take an idea, either one that was their own or brought up by a constituent or a group of advocates, and they draft a bill to make that idea official state policy. Legislators can introduce as many bills as they want on as many topics as they want. So each bill, when you look at it, will have 2 prime sponsors. One is the member of the House and one is a senator. So those legislators are listed first on the bill, followed by the names of the co-sponsors, and co-sponsors are other legislators who have agreed to sign on to the bill. The prime sponsors are typically the legislators whose job it is to really make the case for the bills in hearings and usher it through the legislative process. Next is debating the merits of bills. So the legislature uses a committee structure to debate and have hearings on bills. Both the Senate and the House are split into committees on various topics. Once a bill is introduced, it goes to a committee where it is debated by legislators on that committee. And then legislators on the committee can introduce and vote on amendments or changes in the bills, on the bills in these committee hearings. And last, we have voting to pass or kill bills. Every bill has to survive 4 votes. That's 1 in the House committee, 1 in the full House, meaning all 70 representatives, one in the Senate committee, and one in the full Senate, meaning all 35 senators. So it has to survive all 4 of those to get out of the legislature and land on the governor's desk. So legislators may also introduce and vote on amendments to bills when the entire House or entire Senate are considering them. So these bills can be amended and changes can be made either in the committee hearings themselves or on the floor, full chamber. Each legislator serves a 2-year term. So in November 2020, we elected a new crop of legislators who served in the 2021 session and are going to serve in the 2022 session. And in November of this year of 2022, legislators will be up for re-election. So that's really something to keep in mind for this year. Next, I have a slide that has a picture of the 2022 legislative calendar. It has the months January, February, and March on the left side, and then the days of the week on the top to mark the columns. There are a number of gray squares on the weekends days and on certain days on Mondays and Fridays during the weeks. And then 2 weeks in March are grayed out too. And those grayed out days are days where the legislators are not meeting to have committee hearings, meeting on the floor generally. And then the other days are white squares with different words in them, marking different deadlines. And the white squares are the days that the legislators are in session. So they're at the legislature, they're, introducing bills, they're, debating their merits, and they're voting on them on those white box days. So it's definitely really important to talk about legislative timing, because anything that you want to do during session has to happen on this calendar. Each year, the South Dakota legislative session runs for 40 or fewer days in total from January through March. And the 2022 session has 38 legislative days. The 2022 session begins on Tuesday, January 11th. And then the last day of regular session is March. And what I mean by regular session is that you'll see March 10th is the second to last day in a white box. And there's 2 weeks that are grayed out in between the 10th and the 28th, because the 28th is the final day of session, and it's reserved for the legislators to come back to the legislature and to consider any of the governor's vetoes in those 2 weeks. So March 28th is the last official day of legislative session. And this is a really important calendar to keep in mind, because you want to know when to make moves, and you'll need to know this calendar to do that. Something that I've really found is that people often wait too long to start getting involved and contacting their legislators. So whenever you're thinking about influencing a legislator, make sure you're building in time for them to actually hear your message. Sometimes this can be extremely hard because we see hundreds of bills during session. And that's why it's so important to be as prepared as possible for session. Next, I have the same calendar on this slide, and I want to talk about a couple more important deadlines to be mindful of. There's the January 27th, which is the last day for unlimited bill introduction. So up to this date, individual legislators can file as many bills as they want with no restrictions and no limits. And they can actually pre-file bills before the January 11th start date. But January 11th is the first day in session. And from then to the 27th, they're going to be, they have the ability to introduce, an unlimited amount of bills. February 2nd is another important day. That's the last day for introduction of individual bills and joint resolutions. So between January 28th and February 2nd, legislators can file up to 5 additional bills each. After February 2nd, legislators can't file any new bills as an individual legislator. And then the next one is February 3rd, the next day, and that's the last day for introduction of committee bills. These are also freestanding bills, but they're not introduced by individual legislators. They're introduced by committees. So it'll say something like, introduced by the Senate Judiciary Committee at the request of the Attorney General, or something like that. And then the last two is February 23rd, which is the last day for a bill to pass the first chamber. That's also known as crossover day. So a bill has to make it through its committee and through the full chamber of whatever house it started in, also known as the House of Origin. It has to make it through by February 23rd to move on to the other chamber. And March 7th is the last day for a bill to pass the second chamber. So March 7th is the last day for a bill to pass both houses so it can go to the the governor. I also want to talk about some key definitions. One is an omnibus bill. This is a bill that packages together several measures into one bill, or combines diverse subjects. So it's a lot of different things in one bill that touch on a number of different topics. Hog house is when a committee or a member from the floor strikes everything from a bill and inserts a new one. A smokeout is when a bill dies in committee, but it's brought back in the full chamber for a floor vote anyways. Sent or deferred to the 41st legislative day is something you'll hear a lot, and that means that a bill has been defeated. Sending something to the 41st legislative day is a little bit like making an appointment for January 32nd, because if you remember, there are only 40 legislative days at most in the legislative session. And so it's not a date that exists. So yeah, that means that a bill has been defeated. Then there's also proponents and opponents of a bill. So a proponent is someone who supports the bill, and an opponent is someone who is against a bill. So this is important to remember, because if you're going to be testifying, you want to identify yourself as either a proponent or an opponent. Pages are assistants or interns to the legislature during the legislative session. And then a lame duck is an elected official in the final period of office or after the election of a successor. So this is someone who's been, who has served the amount of terms that they are limited to, and is in their final period of office before they have to, that position has to be, another person has to be elected to that position. Okay. So on this slide, we have two images. One is of the dignity statue, which is an Indigenous woman holding up a star quilt, and a red handprint across the image. And that red handprint is a recurring symbol and imagery discussing the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous people, particularly Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. The second picture is a protest of several people holding up a red and white sign that says "No More Stolen Sisters." So we're going to talk about how a bill becomes a law now, and you'll notice some important timing elements while we walk through it. And we're going to use an important bill from last session to show how this worked and show how it moved through the legislature. HB 1199 was a bill to establish the Office of the Liaison for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons. This bill was created, would create a position in the Attorney General's office that would assist with training and statewide coordination in efforts to locate and solve cases of missing and murdered Indigenous people. This is an extremely important bill because the prevalence of missing and murdered Indigenous people, particularly Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, is a serious crisis. The Rapid City Journal reported that there were 102 missing South Dakotans as of April 2021, and 68 of them, that's almost 70% of the list, are Indigenous, even though Native American people make up only about 9% of the state's population. This is something we all need to be paying attention to. This is something we all need to be learning about from the Indigenous people who have been leading this work, combating this crisis. And it's something that we all need to be working towards ending. And this bill was a great step forward in this fight. On this slide, we have the beginning of a chart that illustrates the two paths that a bill can take when it's introduced in the state legislature. So that's the red path to the right, which is to the House, and the yellow path on the left, which is to the Senate. So because our legislature is bicameral, meaning it has two chambers, bills can either start in the House or the Senate, and it doesn't matter which one it starts in. For the purposes of this flow chart, we have them happening side by side, but that does not mean that they happen simultaneously. A bill moves through either the yellow column and then goes to the red one, or it moves, or vice versa. And it doesn't matter which one it starts in. On this slide, the red and yellow path continue on either side to the next step, which is committee assignments, which are symbolized by a group of people with a discussion thought bubble above it. Bills are first introduced to the full chamber in either the House or the Senate, as I said, and then after they're introduced, they are assigned to a legislative committee for a hearing and a first vote. HB 1199 was introduced first in the House by Representative Poirier and was sponsored by a number of both House representatives and senators from both parties. After it was introduced, it was assigned to House State Affairs, but it could have been sent to another committee. There are generally 13 committees in the Senate and 13 in the House, and 10 of those meet regularly, meaning 2 to 3 times a week. And then committees are generally arranged by issue area. So things like agriculture, commerce, education, the judiciary, health and human services, taxation, and so forth. While bills semi-typically end up in the committee that makes the most sense based on the issue area, bills can be assigned to any committee. Bill assignments are made by the majority party's leaders in the House and in the Senate. And which committee a bill is sent to greatly impacts its odds of becoming a law, because committee bill assignments can be a very political process, because committees, some committees will be more favorable to a bill than others. So for HB 1199, it ended up in House State Affairs, but it could have ended up in another committee. It could have ended up in, House Judiciary, House Health and Human Services. It could have ended up on any committee, but it ended up in House State Affairs. On this next slide, the red and yellow path continue and show the options to either pass or fail in their committee hearings. The first committee hearing is the first big test for a bill. The committee process is fairly simple. The point is to hear the prime sponsor of the bill make their pitch as to why the bill should become a law, and to hear from supporters of the bill and opponents of the bill. Public testimony is taken during these hearings, and legislators can ask questions of those who testify. It's important to understand that public testimony can be time limited. So sometimes you'll get, 20 minutes for opponents, 20 minutes for proponents. They'll sometimes expand that time for bills that are, very controversial and have a lot of people who've shown up, but they can limit it. So sometimes you'll just have 20 minutes. So it's good to be mindful of that, because there are, there might be a lot of people waiting to testify, and it's really important to make sure that people who are directly affected by these bills are prioritized and given a chance to speak directly to their legislators in this committee, because they're the ones that are being targeted. So at committee hearings, anyone can testify either as a proponent or a supporter of a bill, or an opponent, meaning against a bill. Often testimony on either side is made up of legislators, lobbyists, advocates, issue experts, and hopefully South Dakotans who are most impacted by the bills. If you're planning on testifying, make sure to prioritize that people are able to tell their personal story. There are also ways to remotely testify or to submit written testimony if you can't show up in person. But something that you should really know is that committee hearings and committee testimony, they matter, but often legislators have their minds made up before the meeting. By the time a bill is set for a hearing, and definitely in the 72 hours directly preceding directly before the actual hearing takes place, there's going to be intensive lobbying happening and engaged constituents and activists reaching out. This means that if your legislators If you want them to vote the way you would, you can optimize the impact of your voice by talking to your legislators in advance and not waiting until the committee hearing to be the first time you reach out to them. I just want to say a word on timing. So the legislative rules require an intervening legislative day between the day a bill is scheduled for a hearing and the actual hearing. So that means that if a bill is going to be heard on a Wednesday, it has to be posted by 5 p.m. on Monday so that there is that Tuesday as an intervening legislative day. That, is not a long time. While I would never tell you to not reach out to your legislator, you should do so as early as possible so you can make the biggest impact. And the short timeline can make it extremely difficult to participate in person at the state capitol. So be aware of that if that's something that you're interested in and able to do, and make sure that if you can't, you can participate, through that written and remote testimony. You can learn more about how to do that on the legislative website. So at the hearing on a bill, one of two things will happen typically. So the bill will fail to get enough votes and it will die in the committee. And then the second one is that if it gets enough votes, it passes out of a committee. For HB 1199, there were about 20 days between its introduction and its first reading in House State Affairs. So in that time, Indigenous activists, advocates, and community leaders and allies were intensely organizing to try and get this bill passed, and it did. HB 1199 passed its first vote in House State Affairs on a 9-4 vote, and it moved on to the next step. So on this slide, the red and yellow path show that if the bill passes out of committee, it goes to the full chamber, meaning on the red path, it goes to the full House where all 70 representatives will debate it and then vote on it. And on the yellow path, it goes to the full Senate where all 35 senators will debate it and vote on it. When a bill goes to the House or the Senate floor, there's no testimony from any non-legislator. So instead, the legislators will debate the merits of the bills and advocate either for or against them. Sometimes the debate is very short and sometimes it takes a long time. It usually just depends on how controversial or how complex the bill is. To speak to timing, a bill can be up for a vote on the Senate or the House floor the day after it passes out of committee. Though the leadership in either chamber gets to decide exactly when. So it can take several days or even weeks for a bill that's passed a committee to go up for the floor vote. HB 1199 was heard on the House floor the day after it passed the House State Affairs Committee, and it was voted 57 for and 12 against. Well over the threshold to take it to the next step. On this side, the red and yellow path continue to show that in the House and Senate, the bills can either pass or fail. Most bills only need a simple majority to pass, meaning in the Senate, you need 18 votes, and in the House, you need 36 to typically pass a bill. There are exceptions. The only time the simple majority rule doesn't apply is when there's a bill with either an emergency clause or a tax increase. Those bills require a 2/3 vote. The other differences for bills with an emergency clause is they go into effect immediately upon the governor's signature. So that's different than regular bills because typically regular bills don't become law until July 1st of the year that they're passed. So if a bill gets enough votes, it passes. If it doesn't, it fails. On this slide, the red and yellow paths continue to show that if a bill passes, it moves to the other house. So if it started in the House, it goes to the Senate. If it started in the Senate, it goes to the House. And the bill might go to the same committee in the next chamber. So if it was heard in Senate Judiciary and then went to the House, it could be heard in the House Judiciary, for example. But that's not necessarily a requirement. HB 1199 was read into the Senate the day after it passed the full House and referred to the Senate Committee on Appropriations. And then about a week after that, it was actually referred to the Senate Judiciary. Notice that the House and Senate committees the bill went to were not the same. So several days after it was referred to Senate Judiciary, it passed on a unanimous 7-0 vote and moved on to the full Senate where it passed on a 33-2 vote and it continued on to the next step. And we don't see a ton of bills that pass almost unanimously through a full chamber. And this really speaks to how important this issue is and just how effective the Indigenous community and their allies were in fighting for this bill's passage. So on this slide, the red and yellow path come together and show that a bill now follows the blue path and goes to the governor once it's passed both chambers. So for most bills, this is going to be the end of the journey because the majority of bills that go to the governor end up being signed and become law. On this slide, the blue path continues and shows the 3 different options and 3 different outcomes from those options. And it finally completes this infographic to show the full path of how a bill becomes a law. So the first option is that the governor can do nothing and the bill will become law after 5 days. And the second is that she can sign it and it becomes law. HB 1199 was signed by the governor on March 25th, 2021, and it went into effect on July 1st, 2021. A third option that is possible but rare is that the governor will veto a bill. And at that point, the bill is dead unless the legislature overrides her veto. And they can do that with a 2/3 vote of the body, meaning 2/3 of both the House and the Senate. If a vetoed bill fails to get 2/3 of the House and the Senate, it stays vetoed and does not become law. And that's the legislative process. It all starts over every year. Each session is basically a blank slate. That does not mean that legislators won't attempt to pass the same or similar bills each year, but they have to start all over again each year. And every bill that becomes a law goes through this process. So that's how things normally go. But we want to take a second to talk about HB 1217, a bill that sought to ban trans girls and women from playing sports on teams that would affirm their gender. And this was a bill that had a lot of ups and downs in the process as well. It was quite a roller coaster. And I wanted to talk about this one because I wanted to show how kind of weird and confusing the process can get and why it's important to stay connected with organizations like the ACLU of South Dakota and organizations that are following closely and acting on issues that you're passionate about during the legislative session, because we'll generally be able to keep you updated and informed. So on this slide, we have 2 images. One is of 2 people on horseback outside of the state capitol, and one is one of those people on horseback is holding the blue, pink, and white trans flag. And then in the other picture, there's a number of protesters who are holding signs that are blue and pink, and they say trans people belong in South Dakota. So on this slide, we have the full infographic showing the red and yellow paths and the full process of how a bill becomes a law. You can use it to sort of follow along as I talk about the process HB 1217 took. So this bill was extremely harmful for a lot of reasons. It was discriminatory because it banned trans kids from access to the same programs and activities that are available to their cis peers to enjoy. And it was just one of the bills that a number of bills in the 2021 session that were targeting trans kids and seeking to push them out of their ability to live authentically. And it was a bill that, we're seeing so many of these bills and they endanger the lives of trans kids. It was originally introduced by Representative Milstead in the House on February 3rd, and it had its first hearing in House State Affairs, where it was amended and then passed out of committee on an 11-2 vote. 2 days later, it was passed out of the House of Representatives on a 50-17 vote. The following day, it was read into the Senate and referred to the Senate State Affairs Committee. It had its committee hearing and it was defeated on a 6-3 vote there. And that was an amazing feeling. We were scared of a smoke out, but just knowing that it was defeated even briefly gave us a bit of relief. So unfortunately, the following day it was smoked out and revived on the Senate floor on an 18-16 vote, which is a very small margin and really shows why it is so important for everyone to be contacting their legislators, even if you think it won't matter. Sometimes it's the difference of 1 or 2 votes that kills a horrible bill or makes an incredible bill pass. So make sure that you are reaching out to your legislators, even if you think it won't matter, even if you think it's a long shot. So as we covered before, getting a smoke out means that the bill comes to the full chamber, even though it died in committee. So on March 8th, the Senate voted to pass this bill on a 20-15 vote. Then it was delivered to the governor on March 12th. So she responded with a style-informed veto, which is a specific type of veto that is kind of rare. Style-informed vetoes generally are correcting small things like redundancies, but staying within the same style and form of the bill and not changing the substance of the bill. So when the chambers reconvened on March 29th to consider the style-informed veto, they rejected it because they felt that it moved beyond edits for style and form and went into edits that changed the substance of the bill. So when they rejected it, the governor had to return it as a full veto. And after the House failed to, after that, the House failed to get the votes to override that veto, and the bill died. And that was a very powerful moment. And after a session of, organizers, activists, and advocates coming together and having satellite protests and, trying to figure out what we could do, it was amazing to see that it died. But unfortunately, the governor then issued 2 executive orders with the same intention of the bills, but technically, the South Dakota High School Activities Association policy is still in effect. So trans kids can still go through the process of applying to play on teams that affirm their gender. So it's a complicated situation that we're monitoring, but trans kids can still play right now. So, this was a roller coaster. It was a very confusing process. And legislative advocacy often is, unfortunately, a very confusing process because you have to navigate and understand really intricate and complex, systems. The state legislature is kind of hard to understand. That's why we're doing a whole training on it. Government is complicated, and even people who work in government have a hard time understanding different processes. One thing, though, is that we do expect this bill to come back in the 2022 session. So please stay connected with us so we can work together to beat this thing again. I think for the 8th time, I think we've seen before this 7 years of attempts to try and do this. So, please stay connected with us and get involved. We got to kill this thing again. And any other anti-trans bills we see. So now you know how the legislature works, and you've seen some good and bad examples of how it worked last year. On this slide, we have an image of 2 groups. One is labeled elected officials and one is labeled constituents. And they are connected by a squiggly line that shows that constituents connecting with their legislators is an extremely important action step for advocates to take during session and honestly year-round. This is the base of legislative advocacy, is constituent contact. It's the action step that people really struggle with, and it's honestly one of our biggest challenges at the ACLU, South Dakota. We can analyze bills and lobby for and against them. We can put scripts out there. We can, do everything that we can, but we cannot get this job done. We cannot kill bad bills and pass good bills without you taking action, and your action is the most important piece of the puzzle. We need activists and advocates because they have the power to get elected officials to do what they want. Your advocacy is what makes change happen. Your energy, your actions, your personal stories, and your passions, that's how South Dakota gets better and becomes a more just and equitable place for all people. HB 1199 would not have passed without folks who spoke out in favor of it. And HB 1217 would not have died without folks who spoke out against it. And this is so important because good bills will die and bad bills will pass while legislators say on the record that they haven't heard from their constituents about this and they therefore assume that they don't have a problem with it. If a legislator does not hear from you, on an issue, they assume you don't care, and their job is to represent you. So make sure they know how you feel and how they should be representing you. So, how can you get started with this? The first things first, you need to research your legislators, and you can do that at sdlegislature.gov. If you don't know who your legislators are, you can enter your address or city and look up who represents you on a map on this website. You can check out, their voting records. You can see where they stand on things that are important to you, and you can find their contact information, generally their phone and their email as well. There are a few ways to get in touch with your legislators. There's email, which is really good, but there's calls, which are better. And ideally, you want to do both. We have a citizen legislature, and that means that your senator and your representatives spend 3 months in Pierre, and the rest of their time you're living and working in your community. Legislators do not have professional staff, and only a few in leadership have actual offices. So when you call their home or cell that's listed on the legislature's website, that call is going directly to them. And that is an extraordinary amount of access that advocates can and should take advantage of at every opportunity. So we have a few tips for you for when you are contacting your legislators. So the first one is to know your district and your name of your legislator. You want to make sure you know exactly who you're talking to and exactly where they represent. The next one is to plan out what you're going to say. So sometimes for high priority bills for us, we'll put out call scripts that can be kind of a template that you can use to contact your legislators. And you're going to want to personalize that, give it your own voice, talk about your own personal stories. But that can be a baseline for you for certain bills that we are, encouraging action on. But if you don't use our scripts, just plan out what you're going to say, write it down, write out some bullet points, maybe practice it so you're comfortable with it. Just make sure you know what you're going to say beforehand. Tip 3 is to remember to mention the bill number if there is one, and why you're calling or writing. You want to be specific about that bill number, because you might be trying to oppose an anti-choice bill, but there might be 10 anti-choice bills. So you want to make sure that you are using the specific bill number and they know exactly what you're talking about. And you want them to know exactly why you're calling. So identify yourself as either a supporter or someone who is against the bill. Tip 4 is to make it short and sweet and get to your point quickly. You want to make sure that you are prioritizing the important things that you want them to know, your main messages. Tip 5 is to tell a personal story that they can connect to. If you've seen our session from this series on effective storytelling, your personal story is something that people can connect to. It's something that can speak to someone's common values. It's something that can really illustrate for people just how important a bill is and the effect that it will have on people like you. So you want to tell that personal story if you have one. And then tip 6 is problem, solution, action. So you want to state the problem, state the solution, and ask and tell them that you need specific action. So you want to say, vote yes on HB 1199. Make it simple. Make sure they know exactly what you want from them. And then a couple of additional tips that are not listed are not only to contact them when they've done something that you don't like, but when you are recognizing that they did something that you did like. The positive reinforcement can help build your relationship with them. And, sometimes your legislators need it. It can be very hard to vote on some of these bills. And, that positive reinforcement, your legislators are people too. They want to know that people support their decisions. And so it can really help build your relationship to provide that type of positive reinforcement. And then the second additional tip is, let them know that you're going to follow up with them. Be specific about when you will follow up as well. So you can include something like, if I don't hear from you by X time, I will follow up at Y time, so that they know that you're serious, you're watching, and you're staying involved. So on this slide, we have a line that is connecting two symbols. One is a letter with a label that says, write a letter to the editor. And the next is a group of people talking, and it's labeled spread the word. This is a line, this is the start of our section on how you can maximize your impact in your community. So some additional ways that you can get involved beyond just, emails, calls to your legislators. So this line connects, two ways to engage with the media and with people around you. So if you're interested in writing a letter to the editor, that's engaging with the media and trying to spread the word. But it's also really important to engage with people around you, people who are your friends, who are your family, who are on social media with you on your timeline and in person. If you are part of a church community, or you have a specific house of worship, that you're connected to the people in that community. Don't be afraid to talk politics when it's safe to do so, because it's really important. It's probably the most important thing that we can talk about is these things that are going to affect all of our lives and have a disproportionate impact on marginalized communities. If this is something that's really hard for you, if you struggle with, finding the words and finding the courage to talk about these types of things, we do have a session in this series on conflict management strategies that can help you figure out how you're going to approach and deal with conflict on an interpersonal level, when you're just around your kitchen table, on a group level, when you're in an advocacy group or something like that. And on a level at the state legislature, when you're dealing with extremely uneven power dynamics. So take a look at that if that's something that you really struggle with. And hopefully it'll help you feel a little more prepared to take on those conversations. The next slide has this line continued from the previous slide, and it connects to two more symbols. One is a newspaper, and it says, write an op-ed. This is another way to engage the media. It gets your personal take on this out there. It could tell your story and share it to people who follow that paper. The other symbol is a person at a podium, and it's labeled join a cause or organization. Joining a cause or organization is an incredible way to increase your impact, because it'll help you feel connected to the work and to the people around you who are just as passionate as you are, which is a beautiful and necessary feeling. I don't know how I would have gotten through the legislative session without connecting with people who are, fighting these fights and just as passionate as I am, and, feeling connected to the folks around you who are like-minded like that is so necessary and important. Like, it can't be overstated, because we're not alone in this, but it can sometimes feel that way. So also helping, joining a cause or an organization will help you gain resources and build skills and experiences that'll make it more likely that you will stay engaged and that you'll feel prepared to take action. If you're following an organization like the ACLU of South Dakota, we're coming out with this advocacy series, and hopefully that'll help you feel more prepared and help you stay engaged. But other organizations are always coming out with resources to try and try and get people involved, So on this next slide, the line connects to two more symbols. One is a coffee cup that is labeled legislative coffees or Cracker Barrels. That is what we call town halls for legislators in South Dakota. So how these work is that during session, you and other community members will be able to talk to and hear from legislators that represent your district. Something that you want to figure out ahead of time, though, is the format of the Cracker Barrels, because they are different for each district. So who's going to be at these, which legislators are going to be there is something that will change for each district. Do you have to submit your questions in written testimony beforehand? That's a question you'll want to figure out. But these are enormous opportunities to make your voice heard and to show the legislators that you're watching and you're involved. And the last symbol on the line is a group of people with different colored signs below another person in red with a megaphone, and it's labeled public march or protest. This is another great way to maximize your impact. Last year for HB 1217, we had satellite protests across the state. I think we had 9 different protests in different parts of the state on the same day. And it shows that there are people who care. There are people who are watching and wanting to hold hold the legislators accountable. So public marches and protests are great ways to get involved. Whether you're holding one and organizing one yourself, or you are joining one up, it's a great way to get involved if you're able to do in-person things. I also want to take a minute to talk about digital advocacy and things that you can do from the safety of your home during the pandemic. There are a lot of different things you can do to make an impact from home, like phone and text banking, postcards and letter writing campaigns, using your social media to amplify and communicate about actions to the people around you on your timeline, using specific hashtags that are followed by legislators and key actors in legislative advocacy. So that's one hashtag is hashtag SDLeg, so SDLEG. Attending, sharing, and organizing digital events also, and doing work that supports other activists. Yeah, activism and advocacy does not look like just one thing. It's good to be creative. It's good to figure out what role you can play in it. So yeah, these are a number of different ways that you can maximize your impact that way. Another thing that I want to briefly mention that you can do outside of legislative session that makes a big impact is an in-district meeting. We do a deep dive into how to do this in the second half of our Activist Academy for 2019, which is on our YouTube channel. So I would suggest that you check that out if you want to learn more about that. An in-district meeting is simply a sit-down meeting. Another thing that I want to mention briefly that you can do outside of legislative session that makes a big impact is an in-district meeting. And these are kind of hard to get scheduled during session because legislators are very busy. So it's probably best to try and make these happen before session. We do a deep dive into how to do these in the second half of our Activist Academy for 2019, which is available on our YouTube channel. So if you want to learn more about that, I'd suggest watching that first. An in-district meeting is simply a sit-down meeting face-to-face with your legislator in the district in which you both live. Now, I know that for some folks that can be kind of intimidating or scary, but I want you to keep in mind two things. The first is that your elected officials, whether they're state legislators, members of your city council, school board members, or something else, they are regular South Dakotans just like you who live in your community. They're elected for the sole purpose of representing you and the people in their district. So, make sure that they know exactly how you need them to represent you. So now I want to talk about some tips for advocacy, just generally. The first is get personal. If you are a person who is directly affected by these issues, tell your story whenever you are able to do so. Advocacy is about building political will, and in order to do that, we need deep cultural change. When you share your story, you disrupt the cultural narrative that's trying to erase, belittle, or criminalize your experience. I know that it can be very hard to share your personal story, but if you are able to do so, make sure that you are at every opportunity because you want to disrupt that cultural narrative. The second one is always center the needs and the voices of those who are directly affected. If you're an ally, a family member, or a friend, you need to make sure that you're not speaking over or for people who are directly affected, meaning the targets of this legislation. People who are directly affected are always the closest to the solutions because they are experts in their own lived experience and they know what they need. So amplify their voices and follow their lead. Next is, don't be afraid to try something new. And I mean this in both a personal and in a group sense. Don't be afraid to try something that's new for you. If you've never made a flyer or never been to a march, doing new things is how we grow and how we build our advocacy skills. Also, don't be afraid to think outside the box and innovate something with your strategic approach. Every successful advocacy tactic was new at one point, and some of the most successful campaigns have been incredibly creative with their actions. With their messaging and with their strategies. So experimentation can be a really good thing. It can help you catch your opponents off guard. It can help you get media attention if that's part of your strategy, and it can inspire others. The next one is appreciate a diversity of tactics. You won't always see eye to eye with your allies and your aligned partners, but it's important to keep an open mind and to appreciate a diversity of tactics. Try not to get caught up in thinking there's only one right way to advocate for something. And try not to fall for respectability politics and think that because someone is taking maybe a more radical approach, they aren't doing it the right way. We all need to be working together, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we will all take the same approach. So just try and appreciate that. The next one is stay informed. I have some resources for this on the next slide, so I don't want to go into it just yet too in depth, but I cannot overstate the importance of staying informed. Keep paying attention and learning about the bills as they move through the legislature. Keep learning from communities that are being affected by these bills, and keep thinking about what actions you can take to stay engaged in whatever way that means to you. This takes time, so don't discount the time you need to learn and to process what you need to know. So try to be intentional about how you're going to manage your time, and that includes taking time to rest, play, and prioritize your health so that you don't get burnt out. And I'll speak to that a little bit in a minute. So next is be prepared. Do your research, write down and practice anything you want to say publicly, seek guidance from people and organizations that are engaged in this work, and try your best to prepare yourself emotionally as well. It can be really hard to even read these types of bills, let alone fight them, especially if you are someone who's directly impacted by them. So make sure that you're communicating with your personal support network and taking the time to engage in whatever self-care looks like for you. Next is take the long view. Recognize that the fight for a more just and equitable world is a lifelong commitment. You may not see change right away. You may feel defeated this time, but there is always tomorrow, and there will always be work to be done within just ourselves. So, this is a journey. Don't be discouraged or deterred by the short term. And last is take time to rest and play and prioritize your health. This is extremely important. Advocacy is hard. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes emotional and physical labor. It is an investment that you are making in the world that you want to see. But you need to also invest in yourself and your well-being so that you can continue to do this work and to stay engaged. Burnout is a real thing, and that happens when you are taking on too much and not taking the time to rest, play, and prioritize your health. And it can be very hard to pull yourself away sometimes for a number of different reasons, but it is necessary to make sure that you are attending to your personal, emotional, physical, mental needs, spiritual and cultural needs. Like think about yourself as a whole person and what you need to stay involved in this and not get burnt out. So just make sure that you're pausing, but not quitting if you need to take some time away. Make sure that you have a plan for how you're going to get engaged after you've taken that time to restore. And then here are some resources for advocacy. As we said before, connect with community organizations. We all have websites, social media. We're coming out with resources to empower you to do this work all the time. I have a couple of resources specific to the ACLU of South Dakota here. We have this 4-session series. We have an advocacy toolkit that has a lot of the information from this, so you can take it with you. We have a social media page. We have our website, which has our blog and tons of different resources. We have a specific page for advocacy resources that break down tons of different ways for you to get involved. We have an email list that you can sign up for so you can get action alerts from us on different high priority bills for us. And other community organizations have, social media and resources as well. So Find ones that are involved in the issues that you are passionate about and join up with them and take advantage of those resources and take advantage of opportunities that you get to build your advocacy skills, even if that's totally new for you. Next is follow local journalists and stay up to date with the news. So that's super, super important. They're going to have information about the most up-to-date happenings. There are journalists at the Capitol all the time. So make sure that you're following different papers. The next is just the South Dakota Legislature's website. It is everything. You can find the makeups and the staff of the committee and their contact information, where they're going to be meeting and when, the agendas beforehand, the minutes and the audio recordings afterwards. You can find all of your legislators' contacts and who they are representing in what district. You can find the full schedule, the full calendar for the legislative session, previous sessions. You can find voting records. It is a great, great resource. And there's also a My LRC feature on the website where you can create an account and track specific bills and specific committees that are important to you and get email notifications when there are updates on those bills or those committees, like when an agenda comes out, something like that. So check that website out. Just take some time before session starts to really get familiar with it. And the last one is SDNet, and that's where you can live stream the hearings, which you can do that in real time, or you can listen to the hearings through the legislative website, but that's all from SDNet, the audio and the video hearing recordings. So that kind of brings us to the end of the session and the end of the series. On this slide, we have a light blue graphic with the words Advocacy Academy and the ACLU of South Dakota logo in white. And there are smaller symbols in yellow and white. There's a yellow light bulb, a white megaphone, and a yellow pencil. And those are meant to symbolize the ideas we hope that Advocacy Academy has given you, and the actions we hope that you'll take with us in the upcoming legislative session and beyond. Using your voice, writing your legislators, taking whatever advocacy action you can. So as we wrap, we hope you learned something new about legislative advocacy with this session. And if you've been with us this whole series, that you've learned some foundations of campaigning and organizing, some of the social and emotional skills and strategies that you can use to navigate tough situations where you want to advocate for something you believe in. And you've learned about effective storytelling. And hopefully you can now take this and put it all together and hit the ground running with us for the 2022 legislative session. Whether you are writing an op-ed advocating for trans rights, or marching in the streets to oppose the removal of Indigenous history and culture from the state's social studies content standards, or testifying against an anti-choice bill at the state legislature, or maybe all three and more, we hope this series has been a helpful resource for you and that you feel more prepared to raise your voice and get loud and make the change that needs to happen in this state. On this slide, we have a picture of a person in a white top and red pants on a yellow background, taking a pickaxe to the side of a big blue boulder, because this is kind of a representation of how advocacy can feel sometimes, slowly picking away at an indescribably large boulder of issues. But my main ask for you is this, get comfortable being a little uncomfortable, showing up, getting on the phone, scheduling a meeting, showing up in person if you're able to do so, getting organized and strategic with the people around you, and doing it over and over again, taking that pickaxe to that boulder over and over again, because that is what we need. Advocacy is not a check the box activity. It is not a to-do list. It is a practice. Showing up is vital. And no matter how you show up, it is necessary. Your efforts, your stories, and your voices are what will chip away at the boulder of inequality. So with that, we are done with the Advocacy Academy series, and I have our website up, aclusd.org, where you can check out more information and find the rest of the series if this is your first session with us. I hope you have a good night, and I hope to keep fighting with you in the session and beyond. Have a good night.